Hello and welcome. I'm Manon Legrand, transmitting from beautiful Brussels. And here's an update on what the EU institutions did on EU enlargement and democratic values. First, a reminder of what progress means in enlargement. It's not one big moment, but a sequence of legal and political checkpoints. The EU looks closely at whether candidate countries can apply EU rules, protect the rule of law, fight corruption, safeguard media freedom, and run fair elections. And it links steps forward to reforms. In July 2025, the EU kept leaning into a closer before membership approach, pulling candidates nearer through practical integration while demanding reforms. A good example came on July 24, 2025, when the EU and Moldova agreed to review and update parts of their trade framework. It may sound technical, but it's a real signal of deeper integration with accession talks continue. The biggest technical milestones came in September with the end of screening. The EU's detailed checkup, where the Commission and candidate country go through EU law area by area and map what already matches and what must change next. On September 22, 2025, the Commission said Moldova completed screening, and on September 30, 2025, Ukraine completed screening as well. That matters because once screening is finished, the EU is better placed to decide when to open the next major blocks of negotiations. In October, the focus widened from "Are candidates ready?" to "Is the EU ready?" On October 22, 2025, the European Parliament adopted a resolution on the institutional consequences of enlargement negotiations, essentially warning that a large union needs decision-making that stays effective and democratic, so enlargement doesn't create paralysis. It's not a law on its own, but it's a strong political push for internal EU reform alongside enlargement. Then came the major report card moment of the year. On November 4, 2025, the European Commission adopted the 2025 enlargement package. This annual package matters because it guides what member states in the Council are likely to do next. In it, the Commission said Ukraine had met conditions to open 3 negotiation clusters, and it signaled it expected progress toward opening the remaining clusters as conditions are met. It delivered the same message for Moldova. Underneath the technical language, the values point is straightforward. The EU keeps the fundamentals: rule of law, anti-corruption, strong institutions, and rights protections at the center of what counts as real progress. 1 week later, democratic values became a headline EU policy inside the Union too. On November 12, 2025, the Commission presented its European Democracy Shield package and related civil society measures. In plain language, it's the EU trying to better protect democracy from foreign interference, disinformation, pressure on independent media, and intimidation of civil society, including plans like a European Center for Democratic Resilience and closer use of existing digital rules against manipulation online. This links back to enlargement because the EU increasingly treats democracy and security as connected and wants both candidate countries and current member states to be more resilient. Finally, in December, the next political step showed up on the Council calendar. The Forward program indicates ministers were expected to approve Council conclusions on enlargement at the General Affairs Council on December 16, 2025. These conclusions don't create a law overnight, but they matter because they set the shared line among governments and shape what happens next in accession negotiations. Summing up, the EU moved enlargement forward with concrete process milestones, especially completed screening for Ukraine and Moldova. And with the Commission's November enlargement package signaling readiness to open clusters where conditions are met. At the same time, it sharpened its internal democracy agenda with the Democracy Shield, showing that democratic values are being treated less like slogans, but more like a policy toolbox. That's your Brussels update for July through December 2025.
we're in the European Parliament with Magnus Lund Nielsen, politics journalist at Euroactive.
Exactly.
Can you please introduce yourself for
Well,
us?
well, you did half the job there. My name is Magnus Lund Nielsen. I'm a journalist at the Pan-European news media here in Brussels. Euractiv, it's called. And what I'm doing here is that I'm covering European affairs at large for a mainly Brussels bubble audience. Yeah.
So, can you tell us who's next to join the European Union and when do you expect it?
Right. So part of my beat as a politics journalist is also covering the question of enlargement, and indeed, this is a very interesting time on that specific subject because we have a few countries who are very eager to join, and in the midst of this new geopolitical reality that we find ourselves in with Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and some new political winds flying over Washington. The question of enlargement has definitely resurfaced with a new energy than different than from what it was just a few years ago. Question of who will be next. The short answer is Montenegro. The bit longer answer is we'll have to wait and see.
You don't think it's going to be Ukraine?
No, no, and nobody believes that in this town. Ukraine is. I think there is definitely from just about every political level, there is an eagerness and there's a wish from the EU to show that the Ukrainians, to signal to the Ukrainians that their future is indeed within the European Union. But that is very different from actually being led in, and we're not halfway there. The reason why I mentioned Montenegro is because, first of all, Montenegro is pretty far in its reform process. When you are being led into the European Union, you have to live up to a range of criteria to meet the standards, and so you can sort of hit the ground running as an EU member, should you become one day. And on that question, Montenegro is pretty far ahead. Albania is a close second. The reason why Montenegro is so close and why it's obvious is that unlike Ukraine, it's a pretty okay small size country. It would be pretty easy to fold it in to the European Union. Whereas a country like Ukraine would be, in terms of land mass, the biggest one in the Union all of a sudden, which begs a lot of different questions, not only on the Ukraine side of things, but also on the EU side of things. So Montenegro is definitely the one up next.
And when do we expect that?
That's a very good question. I don't think it's completely unreasonable to think that it happens within this political mandate, and this is a political mandate that began next year and runs for 5 years. So between now and 2029, it could happen that Montenegro and maybe possibly even Montenegro and possibly even Albania would join. But there's a lot of things that needs to sort of there's a lot of different ends that need to meet for that to happen.
Danish presidency also highlights merit-based enlargement.
Yeah.
At the Copenhagen criteria. In real-life politics, can we truly keep strict standards while moving fast for Ukraine and others? As you can see, Ukraine is a very loud topic. So
yeah. Actually, today is an interesting day to talk about this because today EU ministers from all the EU member states are meeting in Lviv in Western Ukraine to talk about, well, Ukrainian accession. And what the Danish EU minister have been saying is that we are doing everything we can to front load the process. The issue is that when letting a new country into the EU takes a lot of approvals and a lot of different steps in the process. And currently there is one specific member state, Hungary, that's holding up that process and throwing spanner into the works. And so it's difficult for the remaining 26 Maybe sometimes it's only 25 because Slovakia is not that keen on it either. No, we'll see too with what happens in Czechia, but with Barbie, so it might even be down to 25 and 20 or 24. But the question of letting in Ukraine here and now is not on the horizon. What they're trying to do is that you do as much possible work reforming, sort of leading Ukraine on their way of adapting their society, their laws to fit with this whole thing, with the whole EU law structure, but without actually moving forward formally in the accession process. And the Danes and the Danish EU Minister Marie Pierre has said that this is not only a political imperative for Denmark, but it's also a geopolitical imperative for the European Union, that you keep Ukraine on its right path and you essentially keep Ukraine in fold heading for the European Union.
Thank you. But what would you say to the citizens that fear that enlargement will weaken the EU values?
It depends on who you let in, right? I think what we've learned in the last couple of years is that threat to EU values might as well come from the inside, or at least the erosion of some of the standards that we thought were sort of granted would stay once they were reached. You mentioned the Copenhagen criteria. You have these sort of conditions that you have to meet in order to get to become a member of the European Union. The issue we've realized over the past couple of years is that while a country is applying to become a member, it's pretty easy for the EU to hold it on a leash and say, if you don't meet these standards, we're not going to let you in. But the moment they're inside, there is very few strings to pull in order to keep a EU country on track and sort of staying true to the values that they signed up for in the first place. And that's also going to be an issue when we then, open the circle to more members. So it's a very valid concern. We've seen it in one particular very obstructive member state, going in a different direction than the remaining 26. That problem is not going to get any smaller if we let more countries in. And so that's a very valid concern. I think the conclusion that you reach here in Brussels is that we still need to enlarge because there is no alternative to this. If some of these countries are ultimately let down and not being let into the European Union, are not having their European hopes met, the alternative might be so much worse because we might see them drift eastwards to a very hostile neighbor there.
But how would the daily life in Denmark change after the enlargement? Like in a job-wise, migration-wise, EU budget-wise?
Yeah, okay, that's a very good question. It depends on who joins. I think if Montenegro joins, probably not going to change that much. It's if memory serves me right, it's less than 500,000 people. Also in terms of just of actual area, it's not a particularly big country either. And so it probably wouldn't change much. If you took in a larger country, say Ukraine, I don't think it's going to happen in this mandate. If it happens in the next mandate, that means before 2034. I also think that's probably being a bit optimistic. That would definitely change also maybe. You would see that also, you'll feel that in daily life in Denmark. Potentially because you would see, as you often see when new EU member, when a country becomes an EU member, is that you have this sort of migration bump. We had a lot of people, sorry to say, moving from that country. We saw with Poland, where a lot of Poles, as they became a part of the European Union, left Poland. It is a bump, and so I just want to emphasize that while that tends to happen, it also tends to then slow down and even reverse over time, as you see in Poland right now. You actually have more people moving into Poland than leaving Poland. If memory serves me right. So that would be, we would probably see more Ukrainians on the street working at Danish workplaces, should Ukraine one day become a member. But for the on the question of how much would the average Dane feel that a country like Albania joined, probably not that much in their everyday life.
Depends of the size of the country.
Yes.
We have member states already under Article 7
Mhm.
procedures and concerns about media freedom and corruption.
Yes.
How can EU credibility demand high standards from candidates if it struggles internally?
That's a very good question. Again, it comes back to this issue of it's easy to keep countries on a leash all the while they are applying for the EU membership. We have very few strings to pull once they're inside. It seems to be something that, when I say Brussels, I mean the Commission, and also I think the majority of MEPs here in the European Parliament are preoccupied with, is to better the situation in those member states concerned, where some of the essential freedoms, as press freedoms, are eroding. Currently, we're having conversations about the next long-term budget, and I think one of the successes that you aim to repeat from the current budget is that you have this sort of cash for reform scheme. So if you start to backpedal on some of the things that we sort of took for granted, like press freedom, well, you're also going to see it's going to be reflected in your access to EU funds. It's definitely a concern that is I'm not going to say it's adequately addressed, but it's definitely something that we're talking about. And while it's true that there are definitely some member states struggling with it, I think if you look at large, if you look at the latest report from Reporters Without Borders on press freedom worldwide, I think all of the EU countries, if not, well, close to all of them, I think, are in the very top. I think out of the on the top 10, I believe the vast majority are EU countries. So while there are problems, issues in some member states, at large, it looks like the EU is doing a pretty decent job at that.
Thank you for that answer. What tools and approaches would you like to see to protect the rule of law and independent media in both current and future member states?
In one of the successes that you look to repeat in the next long-term budget, is the cash reform scheme that you have in the current one, where you essentially award, or rather, you punish member states for eroding on some of the basic principles, or walking back from some of the basic principles that upholds this union. It's Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union states these 12 different values that this community essentially is built on. This union is built on. One of those is freedom of speech, and freedom and press freedom is definitely included in there. So this is going to be one of the things that the European Union, that lawmakers here in the European Parliament, the Commission is looking to double down on, also in the medium to long term, that you're going to make it more difficult for member states to walk back on some of these promises to have a free press.
But as you said, member states. And how about countries like, for example, Moldova, that is trying to become a member and has a huge level of corruption, as we could see at the parliamentary elections that happened this year?
But the case is somewhat more clear cut in the sense that they're not a member yet. So you can tell the Moldovans, well, if you don't get this act together, and you can tell the Ukrainians for that matter, because they surely also they are definitely also struggling with corruption. You can tell them that, well, you simply just you're not going to be let in until you've addressed these issues adequately. And there's definitely sort of a balance to be hit there, because at the same time you don't want to let them. You want to celebrate and you want to honor progress, but you also don't want to keep them waiting too long. Ultimately, it is an issue that's more difficult to address in the countries that are already a member of the European Union. And without naming names of specific countries, I think that there is a lesson that has been learned since some of the big enlargement since some of the big enlargements in the early 2000s, where had it been today, those countries probably wouldn't meet the standards that we set for candidate countries today, because we've seen that once they're in, we can't really keep tabs on them. We and keeping tabs is maybe a strong phrase, but it's very difficult to keep them in fold on some of these very important issues, as press freedom, for instance.
Thank you. And the last question, if you can say to a young citizen why enlargement is in their interest, what would you tell them?
It's a very good question. Why is it imperative for the average European to have an enlargement of the European Union? Um, I think on a personal basis, you're probably not going to feel it, unless you just happen to one day want to travel or study in Albania, Montenegro, Bosnia, maybe someday Serbia, if God willing, if they would form, Ukraine. Then of course there's a huge difference between this country not being a member of the EU or indeed being a member of the EU. It matters because it matters to your freedom of movement. But on a more, I think, overall, slightly more philosophical level, this is also important because it's about building a community of well-functioning democratic states that you might not think every day about how important it is that Estonia has a well-functioning judiciary. But it is very important for the Danish businesses, for instance, making trade deals and buying stuff or selling stuff out of Estonia. And so letting countries into this community down the line is gonna probably help some of these countries, and hopefully also Denmark prosper in the long run. But this is also one of the issues for the European Union, because this is not very concrete necessarily. The freedom of movement is very concrete, but otherwise a lot of this is pretty fluffy stuff, like standards for chemicals and or requirements of what you can or what you cannot put into toys. It's difficult to see why necessarily do we need common rules on that, but it speaks into this overall, I think, probably a positive project and aim to build stable rule of law based societies, and that's gonna hopefully benefit the most of us.
Thank you so much for this answer, and thank you so much for this interview. That's the end of the section 2, and join us in section 3.
Hello, everyone. We are now in segment 3 of episode 4 of our Common Future video podcast. I have here together with me Rajesh Bargio, that you probably remember from all the events he makes around in Copenhagen. We have David
Oh.
from Silva. It's a bit
Yeah, I usually pronounce Luksic. That's the best.
Luksic.
Easiest.
Perfect. David
Yeah,
Luksic. And then we have Anna Ageeva, like she was saying,
Yes.
from the SDU, the South Denmark University. So we
Yeah.
have people both from the university side, from the civil society side, and from the business side, where we have Radesh. And as you have seen in the previous two segments, today we're talking about enlargement of the European Union. So we're gonna jump straight in, because we have here today someone from Hungary and someone from Ukraine, and you probably have seen how much love there is between those two countries today. So before I ask Anna, I'm gonna ask David. David, should Ukraine
Go
join
on.
the European Union?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Even though your government says that you shouldn't.
Yeah, there's a reason I'm living in Denmark. I don't completely agree with everything that my government does.
No, I fully understand. I just wanted to tease you a little bit about that, because I know that the
Yeah.
Poland and
Yeah.
Hungary are having a mediatic war on Twitter, where the foreign ministers are just attacking each other live in front of everyone without any sort of diplomatic words. So that's quite
Yeah, but
interesting.
I mean, long story short, it's just one of the attempts of the government to, kind of control the narrative and not talk about what a mess Hungary is in right now, like financially and all this stuff. And it's much better if you're all just talking about this conflict. I don't think the people care about this in Hungary, to be honest.
Okay, no, fair enough. But today we're talking about enlargement. And enlargement, everyone talks about Ukraine, Moldova, and the Western Balkans. The poor Western Balkans that nobody remembers. Like they applied to join EU 20 years ago or more, and they are still on the waiting list. So, Anna, should Ukraine and Moldova join the EU even though war is there happening right now?
Well, shortly, my opinion, my humble opinion is yes, because alongside with many concerns about security and the general problems coming up with the agricultural sector while joining Ukraine and Moldova, there are also many benefits to the EU, such as, for example, 40 million consumers from the Ukrainian markets joining the EU market, as well as the advanced military and rare minerals found in Ukraine and Moldova that could be used and foster the sustainability of EU. Um, yeah. And of course, the concerns of the crisis and war going on in Ukraine and Moldova coming into the issue, but it is not something new to the EU. For example, Cyprus joined while being in a frozen conflict with Turkey. So we saw it being possible. So generally, yes. But of course, there's more to it.
No? Okay. So Ukraine and Moldova should join because of business reasons, because of more population, and because there is a precedent for it. Do you guys agree or disagree? Radesh, David?
Very, very practical reasons. I think I'm a bit more ideologically driven. So I
Okay.
simply just feel like Ukrainians just proved that they belong to the EU. That's my take.
But how do they prove that?
That they chose the Western values, the European values, with the Orange Revolution and all that.
Okay.
I like where David is going, and of course, I fully agree with what Anna is saying, and maybe I would combine the two points of views as, I mean, if we would say that the war would not happen, would Ukraine still and Moldova be part of EU? And my answer would be, considering kind of the political context where there's such a high tension geopolitically between the US mainly and Europe, which are used to be best allies, and now there's a lot of friction in between. Europe finds itself with a few crises at hand. This, just excluding the war, just in between US and Europe. And one is kind of on tech sovereignty, us making sure that European startups are innovating and are competing properly with the US. On defense sovereignty, now kind of getting the war in. So I think that Ukraine specifically has a lot of technology right now and know-how in regards to defense that Europe definitely can utilize in making sure that European Union gains its um, defense sovereignty.
But Radesh, do you think that a bigger EU will be more opportunity for ordinary people?
Um, Absolutely. I mean, if we have a greater economical area that comes, as Anna was saying, I mean, Ukraine's population 40 million. If you add what 3 million in Moldova and then 17 million in Balkans, that's above around 11% population enhancement in EU. This is able to make in EU a greater economical kind of partnership. Of course, there is kind of a most of the trades between EU and Ukraine and Moldova are not including tariffs, but still business is more at ease. I mean, Ukraine has a great IT sector as well, that many of the Danish companies, European companies are collaborating with. This will just smooth out the business collaboration, meaning for normal citizens like you and I, can mean job, can mean, I mean, for us here, meant free movement to go and search opportunities wherever we see fit. And that improves the quality of life, to yeah, expanding our horizons, interacting across cultures. Clearly, it for ordinary citizens, as you call, as you mentioned, it comes with great advantages.
But where should be the limit of expanding Europe? Because I know that the Danish EU presidency is pushing hard for Ukraine, Moldova, and the Western Balkans to be accepted on a fast track. But how far should EU expand? What should be the limit? Should there be no limits for EU? Should it be forever keeping expanding until we call it the global union? I mean, it's a fair concern some citizens have. Who should be European and who should not? Who wants to take that?
Maybe I can add two words, and then I'm gonna let Anna and David
Yeah.
also to join. Um, I think European Union finds itself with many difficulties in hand. For one is the strong nationalistic movements, where people feel that their own culture is not respected, their own rules are not respected by other countries. And it's true that we do have kind of different, I mean, we do, this culture can come in a clash. Um, so I think there needs to be some sort of transition, or kind of a period where we embrace kind of the newcomers. And I think right now it is a good moment, as you're saying, maybe for fast tracking it, because of the geopolitical tensions. Europe, in my opinion, finds itself in a really not good situation, where it calls for unity, because a united Europe is more powerful on its own than in competing with the US, in competing with Asia, with Russia, you name it. But in terms of borders, how much should it expand? As you said, maybe a global. I mean, ideally, I think it would be all nice. John Lennon would be happy to, all grab hands together and then sing "Kumbaya." However, um, yeah, expanding to the European territory, I think that is a logical move or growth in years to come.
Okay, so should Turkey be allowed?
Uh, I'm gonna let the other country answer you.
Tricky
I
question,
was
huh?
actually, I was really hoping this question comes up at one point because I actually have a pretty strong opinion on that one. I
Okay.
think it's a shame that Turkey is not part of the EU, and I feel very bad for them. Like I've been to Turkey several times. I have several Turkish friends, and I don't know. I've just been to cities like, okay, of course, Istanbul. Everyone knows about Istanbul, but I don't know, like Izmir or Antalya or some smaller cities according to Istanbul standards. Um, and they are just much more developed than some of the cities in the European Union. I've been talking to so many people, so many students who share the same values as us, people protesting for the secular state. Or you might remember the stories from the last election when the students were sleeping with the voting bags inside the polling stations because they were afraid that Erdogan will try to steal it. So I feel so bad that these people cannot be part of the union. I really feel like they would belong.
What
And I
about
understand, I can totally understand that we are not in the situation that the EU could integrate the 80 million Turkish people. And I can also understand that Turkey doesn't only consist of these, I don't know, 7 or 8 large cities. I'm just saying that it's very bad that these people cannot be part of this club.
It is very true, and I actually agree with both of you. I think the more countries join the EU, the stronger the EU becomes. And of course, there are so many issues with implementation of more and more countries, the integration, the people, the values, and everything. But at the basis of it all, the more join, the stronger we become. Um, So it is a shame that Turkey cannot join, of course. And I see the opportunity for Balkans, more South Balkans and Eastern European bloc furthermore joining into EU, because we have such unique opportunity with the change of EU coming and the structures and governments aligning finally, or semi-aligning, with Hungarian government being sometimes in the way. But yeah,
Yeah.
it is a perfect opportunity for the expansion of EU bloc, and it would be really nice if we would actually implemented.
Well, I mean, for sure, an expansion will happen. If Ukraine is allowed to enter on a fast track, the Western Balkans will not stay quiet. They have been waiting for 20 years and they will be screaming at the doors. If you allow Ukraine, you must allow all of us. So there will have to be a large expansion, just like when it happened with Romania, not with Romania and Bulgaria, but before
2004.
that, in 2004,
Yeah.
with Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, when there was a huge expansion. There will have to be again when they will have to allow basically Ukraine, Moldova, Albania, North Macedonia, which changed the name to join the EU. Literally changed the name, Montenegro and all the other Western Balkan countries. So it will be a large expansion of, like you said, Radesh, 90 million people. So I don't know how people in Europe will take it. Some people will not be happy with it, obviously. I know you all are positive towards it, but there are citizens who are not happy with this large intake of people that can use the freedom of movement, because that also means more people moving around, new faces appearing in various neighborhoods. So that should be interesting. And of course, when you said should Turkey be allowed, and then that opens a whole of a lot of
Yeah.
political debate. Like, because if Turkey is allowed, then Morocco should be allowed as well. They also applied in 1986. Uh, why
Yeah,
should
but
Turkey be
Turkey is a
allowed?
secular. Yeah. I
Sorry.
mean, Turkey is a secular state. Morocco is not, as much as I understand.
Yeah, Turkey is not so much of a secular state anymore, but okay.
That's my problem. I mean, that's why I feel so bad for them. But you see,
Yeah, because I mean, Morocco technically also has Ceuta and Melilla, right? They are European territory on their territory, and they
yeah,
did
yeah, yeah,
apply to be a
yeah.
member
And
of
they
the
were
European Union.
rejected.
They were rejected. They were actually the only country to ever be rejected.
Yeah,
Turkey hasn't been rejected yet. The case, it's still open since 1986 for them. They
Exactly, but
never.
it's been a while since they
Oh,
were
why?
given a candidate, and yeah, it's only one chapter that has passed, and the process is very slow for them to. Um,
But
is
now
there?
I mean,
let's talk. Yeah, let's try to talk about the enlargement, what it means for us, because obviously when we bring new countries, it means reforms in those countries. It means costs from our side. The new countries will need support. They need to learn how to follow the rules. So Anna, Ukraine should join, but what kind of standards should Ukraine meet before we allow it?
Yes, there are actually so many standards the EU imposes for the candidates to come through. There are 35 opportunities to veto each. Well, basically, like there are 35 chapters, and each of them has very like varying topics from economy, society, freedom, human rights, democracy, industries, sustainability, energy, law, and many, 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 many more to discuss and to implement step by step. And that's actually what the initiative of fast tracking this process is trying to make quicker. They try to implement like make them these little chapters go and be accepted at the same time, because it takes a lot of time to actually ratify and agree with parliament and everything. But I think the existing requirements for the EU to join are really good, because they literally implement every part of a statehood and every part of the Western values that are implemented in the EU into the country that is trying to join. Not only the human rights and freedoms, but also more down to earth aspects such as agriculture, law, energy. So I think EU is actually pretty good at implementing these aspects of integration of Ukraine and these standards that the country is supposed to be done with and fulfill before joining.
What do you think Ukraine should like? If you were to, for yourself, you Anna, a
Yes.
normal citizen, what do you think Ukraine should solve first before you should see it as a member? What should be the utmost condition EU should say? You do solve this, otherwise you don't get in.
Okay, so for me personally, I
Yeah.
would think, and I would say that it is corruption, of course. There is a very big issue with Ukrainian corruption, and it is known to everyone that we have a long standing issue with that. But, and of course, there are some efforts to make it go away, to fix it, and there are so many government led initiatives to fight it. But generally, in order to join the EU and in order to speed up the process, I would say that the corruption is supposed to be uh, eliminated first hand.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of people have raised questions about corruptions in Ukraine, and I'm wondering how can they solve it, because look at current or existing members of the union, right, David? Like Hungary,
Yeah.
you got your EU has frozen money for Hungary over rule of law
Yeah.
problems. So what will happen with current members that don't respect the chapters that technically they have passed somehow?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I besides you already met my ideological side, but besides that, I think I have a practical side as well. And like again, if you talk about Turkey, I don't think this Turkey could be part of the union. I wouldn't want to be live in a union with Erdogan's Turkey, and I wouldn't want to live in Orban's Hungary either. I really think that we should be much more. And like as I'm saying this as a Hungarian, that I think the EU should be much more, let's say, potent in standing up for the European values and have more enforcement mechanisms for the for these criterias.
But don't you think that if EU tries to be too tough on Hungary, people will react negatively? Even the pro-Europeans in Hungary will might be like, wait a second, they go too far. Will not kill the pro, because I see now that in Hungary there's a strong pro-European movement coming up, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's just trying to take down Orban's power. So,
Yes.
do you think that if EU will have been harsher with Hungary, more harsh than this, would that have killed off any sort of potential anti-Orban movements?
Good point. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know honestly,
Okay.
but I can also see that like ordinary citizens are currently sort of suffering from the lack of fundings. But at the same time, I think for most people, it's very clear that like there's a crystal clear set of conditions that the government would have to comply with in order for the European monies to continue flowing into Hungary. It is entirely up to Orban's government whether they prioritize these funds or the power. And I think that's clear to most Hungarians. And we have probably come to the point, or many people have come to the point where they felt like, yeah, Orban is not that important for us after all.
Okay. That's nice. Well, that's good to hear, basically. So, Raresh, what European values mean to you? You have joined. Romania has joined in 2007. How many years is it now? More than
18.
20?
Good 18.
18. 18
18.
years. That's basically you're an adult now. If you were born in 2007, today you are an adult. So
Romania
European
grow up
values.
so quickly.
Yeah, European values, Radesh. What do they mean to you? And do you think they're shared across the continent? Do you think Romanians have learned to be Europeans?
Um, this question has so many kind of pillars that you can approach it from. Um, I could clearly see or sense where I come from in Transylvania that there was a general joy in regards to being part of the European Union. It came with so much kind of hope and opportunity. This was the general understanding. Um, And to me, European values maybe come with, yeah, fighting for democracy, fighting for the right of speech, fighting um, for encouraging European companies. So, for example, whenever I go in the grocery shop, I'm looking where the goods come from, or whenever I shop for clothes, is this shoe made in Portugal or in Romania or in Hungary versus Asia or whatever else? I would actually base my buying decision on that, just because I would like to give my money, I mean, money in this case being power, I want to give the money towards a European business. It also comes with a European value. I think it would be to respect culture and culture differences. Um, I am right now married to a Danish German woman, and we're raising a child together that is, Romanian and German and Danish in Denmark. Um, and of course, it comes with a lot of cultural differences, which is such a blessing. And of course, it also comes with difficulties because, us Romanians being Latin-blooded Balkans, in a Germanic culture in Denmark, it just adds complexity in the way you're building a family. So I think a European value in this sense is learning how to respect the culture differences. And then the last thing that, I'm in Denmark. I've been away from Romania for 11 years now, and free movement and studying abroad has made a huge difference for me and my well-being, um, which doesn't just enhance my own life. Of course, I'm happy for it, but it also kind of, um, I don't know, I might move back to Romania at some point, or maybe southern Italy at some point, and so on. And I'll bring all these things, learnings along the way, this international aspect with me. So those would mean to me that, having fighting for an integrated Europe, that is something that I would value a lot.
Okay, thank you so much, Rajesh. Now we will go to the last part of this talk show segment, and here we have one question for each of you, and it'll be a quick question, so you don't have to stay long to answer it, but it will challenge you a little bit. So, Anna, you are a Ukrainian living in Denmark. So,
Yes.
do you think that for the sake of peace, EU should one day include Russia?
You should what?
Do you
Sorry.
think that for the sake of peace, like to
Yeah.
make sure the world is more peaceful, should we accept Russia one day as a member? I think people are dreaming of a
Well,
Euro
of
Asian
course.
Union.
Yes. So I hope it is not happening over one night. But in due time, with the change of the government and with the new generation of people who do have and believe in the European values that we have just talked about, I believe that the integration is possible, that change is possible, that we should all believe in peace and in prosperity altogether. Because, as I have already stated, the more of us, the stronger we become. So, while of course, if it doesn't happen overnight, and the Russia comes through full process of integration, um, that EU basically offers for the countries who want to become the member state, I believe that yes, Russia can be integrated, and one day
Well,
it
that
should be
was
an
just a
opportunity.
quick question. It was just to
Sorry.
see if one day do you think that the pain of war will be somehow would be possible that two countries that obviously had been at war could be together. The same can be for Greece and Turkey, right? Can
Yeah.
Greece and Turkey survive in the same space after they have been at war for so many years?
Yes.
Raresh, quick one for you. How can people from the new member countries, hopefully Ukraine, Moldova, especially Moldova, considering it's a Romanian country, how can citizens in there shape EU's future? What would you recommend to Moldova, especially? What would you recommend to them so that they don't repeat Romania's mistakes in the first years of joining the EU?
I would probably focus on uh, basically getting out and exploring what Europe can do for them. There are many, many opportunities that European Union can bring in Moldova, and I think Moldovans have, once they join, they have almost an obligation to explore this and see how kind of opportunities they can bring home.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Raresh. David, quick one for you. Next country to join the EU, because what if it doesn't happen to be a wave? What if it happens to be only one? Why? Which one would you choose and why?
Yeah, I've been talking about Western Balkans and Turkey. I don't want to repeat myself, but I think Moldova, like from if you don't look at the ideological question, like if Ukraine should be there because it's a political message and everything. If you put that aside, I was very impressed. I was an international observer of the parliamentary elections in Moldova, and I was very impressed by both the organization and the results of the election. I think they are on the right track.
Fantastic. So Moldova is next. Thank you so much, Anna, David, and Radesh. It was a pleasure to talk to you about the expansion of EU. I'm so happy to see that 3 EU citizens here. Well, Anna, future EU citizen.
Almost.
Yeah,
One day,
almost.
maybe.
Soon. My bet is before 2030 for sure.
Hopefully.
Yeah, that's a lot of analysts are betting that EU will next wave will be 2030, 2029 or 2030, one of those two. It's supposed to be the next wave. So let's see. I mean, we all know that what Ukraine has done for us, so I guess nobody will forget that part. So thank you so much to the 3 of you for being part of this segment, and have a good evening.
Thanks
Yes,
for the talk.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
You
Narcis.
too. Bye.
Hello everyone. Just as you got used from the previous episodes, now we're discussing about what Denmark's EU presidency has done on EU enlargement. So we'll explore which new countries are on the path to join European Union and how the EU is making sure its core values like democracy and rule of law stay strong as it expands. So, why enlargement? Why now? Well, the war in Ukraine has perhaps paradoxically strengthened the EU's enlargement agenda, which has been kind of frozen for the past decades. Denmark's EU presidency has been a driving force in keeping up this momentum. Early in the presidency, in July, the EU held its first ever EU-Moldova summit, marking a new stage of cooperation and integration with one of its eastern partner countries. That was a symbolic boost for Moldova, which became an official EU candidate in 2022 and has been racing through reforms since. A lot has happened on the road to enlargement in the past few months. Let's start with Ukraine, the most high-profile candidate. Despite the ongoing war, Ukraine remains strongly committed to its EU accession path. A major milestone has been on September 30 when Ukraine successfully completed the screening process of its laws and regulations, essentially an in-depth comparison of Ukrainian laws with EU rules. This was a remarkable feat, achieved in a little over a year of intensive work. Completing screening means Ukraine and the European Commission examined every policy area and Ukraine has laid out plans to align with EU standards. So that means Ukraine can progress on their path to become a member of the European Union. Now Moldova has a similar success story. Despite facing continuous hybrid threats and attempts at destabilization, Moldova has significantly advanced on its accession path. It too completed the screening process and has carried out key reforms. In July, as mentioned, the first EU-Moldova summit that we just mentioned earlier was a clear political sign of Moldova's European integration moving forward. By the Commission's November assessment, Moldova, like Ukraine, had met the conditions to open negotiations in the same 3 clusters: fundamentals, external relations, and internal market. The expectation is that the Council will agree to open all clusters for Moldova alongside Ukraine. Moldova's government even hopes to close talks by early 2028, which would be an amazingly swift integration if achieved. That is actually the plan. They expect that a lot of new countries will be joining 2028, 2029, and 2030. What about the Western Balkans, right? The traditional candidates that are waiting now for more than 2 decades. Well, here 2025 has been a year of significant progress as well. The Commission enlargement package highlighted that Montenegro and Albania stand out for advancing reforms in the past year. Montenegro has re-energized its efforts to join and is arguably closest to the finish line, having opened all chapters and focusing on closing them. Albania, which formally opened negotiations in 2022, made solid strides in judiciary reforms and the fight against corruption in 2025, bringing it closer to moving through negotiation chapters. On the flip side, there are candidacies that have stalled due to values and governance issues. The most sobering example is unfortunately Georgia. Back in late 2022, the European Council told Georgia that its candidacy was conditional, and by 2024, EU leaders concluded that Georgia's process was de facto halted due to democratic backsliding. Unfortunately, in 2025, the situation in Georgia deteriorated further. We've seen a rapid erosion of the rule of law and severe restrictions on fundamental rights, including laws that undermine civil society and media freedom. Denmark, known for its strong stance on human rights, has certainly supported holding firm on values in such cases. So unfortunately, Georgia is not getting any closer to become a member of the European Union. We should also mention, of course, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia, Kosovo. Bosnia became an official candidate also in 2022, and under Denmark's presidency, the Council has kept up pressure for it to implement a lengthy list of reforms, from electoral changes to judiciary steps, before moving to the next stage. Serbia and Kosovo are a special case tied to each other. Serbia is negotiating chapters, very slow, but its progress is linked to normalizing relations to Kosovo, something the Danish presidency has left mostly to EU foreign policy chief diplomacy. There haven't been major breakthroughs in the Serbia-Kosovo dialogue in the late 2025, and actually tensions flared in the north of Kosovo at one point, reminding everyone that stability and democratic values go hand in hand. Thank you for listening to this update about the enlargement. As I said, most likely we will see new member states in 2028, 2029, and 2030. See you in the next episode.